Picture this, it's a scorching July day in 1544. The air is thick with the sound of clashing shields, clashing of swords and cries of the wounded. This site here witnessed one of the bloodiest clan battles in Scotland's history, and it was called the Battle of Blarnalleen, also known as the Battle of the Shirts. In July 1544, this field here would have witnessed one of the bloodiest clan battles in Scotland's history. It's estimated that around 800 men died on this field, with a mere handful of survivors. It was a fierce clash between the Frasers, the Grants and the Mackintoshes, led by Lord Lovat and Ranald Gallda, and the MacDonalds and the Camerons, commanded by John of Moidart. I think that's how you say it. This battle would determine the leadership of Clanranald and showcase the intense rivalries and violent conflicts that characterised the relationships among Highland clans. So, to this side here, that was the side that the Clanranalds of MacDonald's and their allies, the Camerons, they shadowed the Frasers of Lovat and the Grants and the Mackintoshes force who were on the other side of Loch Lochy. So they, with the accompany of the Earl of Huntly, they were actually trying to track down John Moidart and his forces and his allies, but they couldn't find him because they took to the hills, because the Frasers and their allies, they had a bigger force. So the MacDonalds of Clanranald and the Camerons, they just fled to the hills, went into the outbound. They couldn't find them. But what they did was clever. They didn't just go completely away. They actually shadowed the force that was pursuing them. And this was very clever. They waited until a large part of the Frasers of Lovat's force had left with the Earl of Huntly. So they had left. I think it's the Earl of Huntly. I hope I'm pretty confident it was the Earl of Huntly who was assisting the Frasers of Lovat in their pursuit of Clanranald of MacDonald, because the guy John Moidart, he had essentially been imprisoned by King James V, and this was a disputed succession for the chiefdom of Clanranald of MacDonald, and they were quite a powerful clan. Ranald Gallda, he was on the side of the Frasers, and this is what the battle was about. He was a claimant to the chiefdom of Clanranald, the seat of Teorum Castle, just on the west coast. But John Moidart, he was the other claimant. Now there's an interesting story about Ranald Gallda, and it goes to when he was being inaugurated as chief of Clanranald. And during this time it was tradition, Gaelic tradition, you know, to bring gifts of cattle to the chief and other gifts. And it was a translation, a Gaelic translation, it was like a river to the people. Now during this time there was cattle being slaughtered for the feast, and apparently Ranald Gallda quipped, why do we need to slaughter the cattle? Chickens would do fine instead. And from that point on he was known as Ranald of the Chickens. So maybe that was a factor in his ultimate downfall. Now in 1543, John Moidart escaped prison and made his way back to Ranald lands. Now during this time he retook Castle Teorum, and Ranald Gallda, he then fled to the Frasers of Lovat. Now after John of Moidart retook his homeland, he gathered support from MacDonalds from various different factions, including the MacDonalds of Glengarry and Keppoch, and also he was assisted by the Camerons. So after John had taken his lands back, Ranald Gallda had fled to the Frasers of Lovat. Now, during that time, the John Moidart and his allies, they marched north towards Uckert Castle and actually took over the castle, which was in control by Clanranald. Now, during this time, they did a lot of raiding and pillaging of the Fraser and Grant lands, which were quite close to each other around the Loch Ness area, and caused a lot of devastation, stealing cattle and destroying the farmland and just wreaking a bit of havoc. Now, upon word of this, the Frasers of Lovat now, so Ranald Gallda is now with the Frasers of Lovat, Lord Lovat. They called for help to the Earl of Huntly. So then he gathered his forces and came to the aid of the Frasers of Lovat. Now, during this time, they combined their forces, the Frasers, the Grants, and Lord Lovat, and then they marched towards fighting John Moidart and the MacDonalds and his allies. Now, at this time, John Moidart, they made their way back south through the Great Glen back to this area here with Loch Lochy, and then they essentially just ran into the hills and hid, because the force that was coming after them was a much superior force with the Earl of Huntly and the Clan Frasers of Lovat. Now, when it comes to specific numbers in armies, I am very reluctant to say exactly, there was exactly this amount of men in the force. And the truth is, we don't know. All the historians, they don't know. People weren't there 500 years ago. We just try to go with the best evidence that we have. And the best evidence that we have stated that Clanranald of MacDonald and his allies, they formed around 800 men. And the forces from the Frasers and the Earl of Huntly, it was around a couple of thousand, maybe 2,000. Now, so they made their way down south through the Great Glen in pursuit of John of Moidart, and he took his forces up into the hills behind Loch Lochy. So at that point there, the Earl of Huntly, they kind of just abandoned the chase, because they can't be leading armies up into the hills, because they wouldn't be able to find them, and it wouldn't be the best terrain, for a battle up in these mountains. So essentially, the forces that had been in this pursuit of John of Moidart, they split into two. So the Earl of Huntly actually went back to Huntly, and the force that remained was the Frasers of Lovat and the Grants and some Mackintoshes. At this point here, John Moidart, even though the Earl of Huntly and the Frasers, they thought John Moidart and his forces were way hiding up in the hills, they were apparently actually stalking the force the whole time. So they would have seen the force being divided in two, one half going away, the majority of the force leaving, and a minority of the force remaining. Now, it's estimated that around 300 men consisted of this Fraser force and Grant and Mackintoshes that were left. 300 to 400, like I say, we don't know the exact numbers, but it was something around about there. Now, the Lord of Lovat, the chief of Clan Fraser, he was in command of this force now with his son, his eldest son, who was the heir to the Frasers of Lovat. So at this point here, John Moidart, they started to follow the Clan Fraser's force, who was moving back up on the other side of Loch Lochy, the southeastern side of Loch Lochy, coming back up. Now, during their, I wouldn't say retreat, because they weren't retreating from the battle, they were just, they were falling back towards their lands. Now, simultaneously, during this time, John Moidart and his forces, they were shadowing that force all the way up along the other side of Loch Lochy, and it came to a head when they met at the northern point of Loch Lochy, just behind me here. Now, as I showed you in the field here, this is apparently where the battle took place, in this field, and it's called Blarney. There's actually two explanations why it's called that. One is Blarney is it's called that because it was swampy ground, and that was the name of the battle. And the other is, it was called the Battle of the Shirts because it was apparently a really scorching hot day on July in 1544, and the men, they took off their chainmail and their garments, you know, because back then that would have been the attire of the soldiers. So that's the two originations of the name, but I'll let you decide which one you prefer. So this battle then started to take form. So John Moidart and his allies, the Camerons, the MacDonalds of Keppoch, the MacDonalds of Glengarry, they then outflanked the Frasers and came behind them. So they're actually cut off. The Frasers were coming up this side of Loch Lochy, just looking to go through the Great Glen and go back to their lands, but they were now cut off by a much superior force in the MacDonalds and the Camerons. Now, like I said before, so the force of the MacDonalds and the Camerons was estimated to be around 800 men, and the Frasers in the Grants and the Mackintoshes, it was estimated it was around maybe just under 400, so less than half the force. So the John Moidart, his forces, they outnumbered them 2 to 1. So then, once they outflanked them, that was it. There was no way to run. There was nowhere to go. Now, during the battle, it actually started off with a skirmish of archers exchanging arrows and archers, and then ultimately it just led to a full-on confrontation of both forces, close combat. And it's reported that during the battle, a lot of the soldiers, they actually threw away a lot of their long swords and some of their larger weapons they had, and they actually just took out weapons that were more suited to close combat weapons, like, you know, short daggers and knives and shorter swords. So if you could just imagine how bloody that battle would have been. You're close quarters, you've not got any chainmail on, it's just essentially knives, and you're rubbing up against people, their shields with no armour. It would have been absolutely hectic. It would have been a battle that I would not have wanted to be anywhere near, and I don't think any of you would have been wanted to be near it. Also, when the battle started to progress, obviously the Frasers were severely outnumbered, but to their credit, for having, you know, it's reported that for having such a minimal force, they fought extremely brave, and you know, they held true to their nature of being, you know, fierce warriors. The Frasers of Lovat were renowned for their, you know, having, you know, generations of, you know, the culture of warfare. Their soldiers were always very brave and very, you know, skilled in battle. So the MacDonalds and the Camerons, they ultimately had the superior force. So they were the victors in the battle. But I'll let you decide if there was a victor of this battle, because of the estimated 800 men that actually fought in this battle, only around 17 to 20 MacDonalds and Camerons survived the battle, and it's estimated to be single figure survival for the Frasers of Lovat. So that doesn't exactly seem like a victory for anyone. And during this battle, the Lord Lovat and his son, the heir to the Frasers of Lovat, he actually died during the battle, and John Moidart, he survived. It's also important to stress that that is a huge loss of life. I mean, 800 deaths, it's estimated to be. That is an enormous loss of life, and it's why this was one of the bloodiest clan battles in history ever fought between two clans. Obviously, it wasn't just two clans. The feud was between mainly the Frasers and the MacDonalds, but there was multiple clans in this battle. So I'm not going to say it was between two clans, because there was a number of different clans in this battle. And it's not a battle that's really talked about as much, but it should be, because it would have been an absolute, if you just imagine looking out in this field here and just seeing 800, nearly 1,000 men coming to battle with no chainmail, no armour, close quarter weapons, and just absolutely hacking each other to pieces. It would have been absolute chaos. Now, after the battle, John of Moidart, he went back to claim the chiefdom of Clanranald at Teoram Castle, and during that time it was said that the majority of the Fraser fighting men, they had actually perished in this battle, and then that led to a lot of raids, many raids on Fraser and Grant lands by the MacDonalds of Keppoch, Glengarry and Clanranald, along with their allies. So when news of this catastrophic battle had reached across the country, naturally John of Moidart, he was sent word that he was to answer for his crimes by Edinburgh, the Privy Council in Edinburgh. But obviously he didn't go, he just stayed at Teorum Castle with his many warriors, now under their what they thought was their rightful chief. And that was essentially it. He just stayed at Teorum Castle, and they couldn't do anything because he commanded so much men, you know, and they can, and it just, this kind of like signifies how strong these clans were at the time, because King James V, so he was the King of Scotland at the time, and he would have been outraged at hearing this, because he had thrown John Moidart in jail, and now he'd escaped, came up here, killed a loads of clansmen of the Fraser clansmen and Grant clansmen, and retooken his seat at Teorum Castle. Now, 10 years later, it's said that it was quibbed from a member of the Privy Council of Edinburgh, which was like the law and order in Edinburgh in Scotland at the time. It was quibbed that why is everyone else in Scotland bound to the law apart from John of Moidart? Because he'd just been relaxing at Teorum Castle, and but essentially been an outlaw because he was wanted by the Crown and by the Parliament, but they weren't going to send up forces to try and capture him at Teorum Castle, because he would just flee into the hills like he did when the Earl of Huntly came chasing after him. And even if they did stay and fight, he would have gathered a strong amount of support, mainly from the MacDonalds, which could raise, you know, they could raise huge armies here in the Highlands. So it was essentially, it was just left, and he was left to stay at Teorum Castle. Now, the chief of Clanranald, John Moidart, he was like many other clans in the Highlands, many other clan chiefs. He was a king in his own kingdom, and he died in his bed in 1584. So he faced absolutely no reprisals for escaping prison and winning the Battle of the Shirts and killing many clansmen in the process. And it's just a somber reminder of how powerful these clans were. And this battle, it's maybe not known by as many people, but just looking at the battlefield here, you get a sense of what it would have been like, because, you know, I'm looking at it now and I can see, you know, it's really marshy and it's quite, you know, high grass, and I don't think there would have been many people cutting the grass back then, so it probably would have been similar to what it is now. And it would have been chaos, swampy ground, you're fighting with no armour, no chainmail, and it would have just been absolute chaos. I mean, you can just imagine the scene of 800 bodies lying on this field. It just would have been absolutely catastrophic to witness. And I mean, obviously the MacDonalds won, and John of Moidart, he won and retook Teorum Castle and became leader of Clanranald officially. But many also saw Gallda, Ranald of the Chickens. Many of them saw him as, you know, the correct heir. So it was disputed for a long time. But yeah, so that's the Battle of the Shirts, or Blar na Leen. I'll let you pick which one you like best. So anyway, folks, I hope you did enjoy this video, and if you did, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and also leave a comment as a sacrifice to the algorithm, because those are the ones that really help the video grow. And you know, I want to continue doing many videos like these, so any extra support from you guys is greatly appreciated. So yeah, I'm not going to walk away out of shot because the camera will rock about in here, so I'm just going to say goodbye and we'll close out with some aerials. So take care, folks. See you next time.